welcome to this webinar on how to set up an OpenVPN server. My name is Ben Silverstein. I'm a solution engineer in addition to many other things that I do here at Endian. And obviously, we wanted to do a technical webinar on how to set up an OpenVPN server for remote access. It's obviously a very interesting topic given the times that we're in right now. If you have any issues with the audio or the presentation, uh, please just let us know using the chat feature. All right, so let's get started here. So a little background on Endian for those of you who are not familiar with the company or haven't kept up with things that are going on at Endian. So our mission is to provide a platform that connects people and things in a secure way to enable communication over the internet, remote management, monitoring, analytics, and other applications that run on the edge or core of the network. And kind of the three pillars that of our solution set that we provide are the secure, monitor, and analyze that you see down here at the bottom. So the big thing that has become our focus in the recent years is what we call the secure digital platform. So you can see here we offer secure connections that are ensured by a mix of hardware and software-based security gateways built for businesses and industrial companies to connect them to a centralized platform that runs on-premise or in the cloud. So for those of you that have not seen Endian in a while, this is something that's relatively new, but it's definitely becoming the center of everything that we do at Endian is to create what we call a secure digital platform. And we'll talk a little bit about the product portfolios that we offer that fit into the secure digital platform as well. So a little background fact information about Endian, the company. So we are an Italian cybersecurity company, so we're based in Italy, founded all the way back in 2003. Believe it or not, we were the first commercial vendor to integrate OpenVPN into a commercial product. In 2011 was when we started to pivot to the Internet of Things or Industrial Internet of Things, IoT, and we've just been kind of strengthening that position ever since. And that's really been something that's become a big component of Endian. Our platform is built around what we call Endian OS, so that's the platform itself. Regardless of which product you're using, it's all built on the same kind of core software solution, which is Endian OS. And then, of course, a lot of people are familiar with the community version, the open source community version of Endian OS that we put out, which is similar to, but is also does not have all of the feature set. And the difference between the community and the enterprise is getting more and more, just because of all the features that we're adding that we are not able to add to the community edition as well. And then you can see we have our office presence. Obviously, Italy, we have 2 locations, and then we have offices in Germany and the USA, which is where I am based out of. Just some of the well-known companies that are using the Endian solution, you can see here. So we'll just kind of give you a second to look over those. So I mentioned the product portfolios. So this is kind of the 3 different product portfolios that we offer. So what we're going to talk about today, which is the UTM, the one that's been around since 2003. It was the product that started the company all the way back then. Unified Threat Management. We call them security gateways as well. You can kind of interchange those, but our terminology is security gateways. So they're all in one network security appliances for more traditional corporate commercial IT applications. Then we have a more focused product portfolio called 4i, which stands for 4 Industrial, and those are our industrial security gateways. So these are running a subset of the UTM Endian OS. So they're just minus a few features like web filtering, email filtering, hotspot, things that aren't relevant in the industrial network security field anyways. And they're running on hardware appliances that are built for industrial applications. So they have different power inputs, 24-volt DC power, and they have different input-output ports that are typically not something you would see on the corporate side, the IT side. And then last we have kind of a specialty product that came out of the UTM, which is our hotspot and BYOD appliances. So these are appliances that really specialize in running our hotspot solution, which is included in the UTM product, but it's just more focused on those that want to just run the hotspot with a subset of network security features wrapped around that hotspot functionality. So you're still getting network security protection, but you're also providing that hotspot captive portal solution for, that's really popular in the retail and hospitality places, and where you go and you get the connect to Wi-Fi and you get a splash page where you have to log in and all that stuff. That's what the hotspot product set is geared towards. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about start talking about the actual content of the webinar, which I know is what everybody wants to get to, which is the SSL VPN, setting up an SSL VPN. So just a little more background information to give you guys an overview for those of you who are not familiar with the Endian UTM VPN application. So Endian provides a complete SSL VPN solution built, of course, around OpenVPN. We also have IPsec VPN as well, but that's not something that we're going to go into detail about today. Just to let you know that we offer both flavors of VPN. Our SSL VPN solution can provide both net-to-net connectivity, so you can connect Endian devices together using SSL VPN in order to connect office networks together so that they can communicate. Or you can also use it for remote access road warriors, which is users out in the field with laptops, traditionally using laptops and wanting to connect to their home office or their business office using a software client over the internet. So you can do both things using the SSL VPN solution, and you can use them, together, so to speak. So you can have both net-to-net connections and remote access connections set up on an Endian appliance. So a little more about why the SSL VPN solution is attractive. What are the advantages of using SSL VPN over something else like IPsec or another solution? So we do offer for our enterprise customers an Endian SSL VPN software client, and we offer that on the major platforms, which is Windows and Mac, and then Linux also has built-in support for OpenVPN as well. So we obviously support the Linux platform as well. The great thing about SSL VPN is that it works in virtually any network environment. So you can stick it in front of a firewall, behind a firewall. It can be something that's being NATed behind. It works out through a NATed connection, for example. The only real requirement of SSL VPN from the server side, if you will, is to have a single TCP UDP port accessible from the internet that a client can use to connect to it. And it can run on any TCP or UDP port. So that's including, for example, TCP port 80 or 443, which is in very restrictive environments is a port that may likely still be open to the outside world, so that a client could then connect to the server through that restrictive firewall. So that's really something obviously you can't do very well with IPsec or at all in some cases. So that's a huge attraction, the fact that it's just so flexible in terms of where you can deploy it and how you can access it from a client standpoint. In addition, on the enterprise product as well, we have support for user authentication, so you can um, tie into an existing Active Directory or LDAP server that you might have, and users can then log into the SSL VPN server using those credentials from Active Directory or LDAP that they would normally use in the office. It does work in two different modes, what we call routed or bridged mode. The default is bridged mode, meaning um, the device, when a device connects, it will be connected to the local area network, what we call the green zone. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we start getting into the demonstration. Um, Another advantage of the solution is that you can actually set up multiple SSL VPN server instances on a single appliance. So you can have, um, for example, a primary instance and a instance that's a failover instance. So if a client can't connect to the primary instance because it's not able to connect over on that port, it could also try to connect to a failover instance that's running on a different port. You could also have multiple instances for different types of user groups. So maybe IT people are connecting to one server instance, and regular users are connecting to a different server instance with different options that are enabled. And then, of course, we do have support for third-party OpenVPN clients as well. So if you, for whatever reason, don't wish to use the Endian SSL VPN client, there is support obviously for using OpenVPN, other OpenVPN clients that are out there. We're not going to go into any of the detail on a lot of this stuff, but this is just kind of for your information. So like we just talked about, and for those of you who aren't familiar with Endian, we use color-coded network zones to designate the different um, traditional networks that you would find on an Endian device. So um, the two that are relevant for this conversation are the red zone, which is an internet, your primary internet connection, and the green zone, which is your most trusted local area network. So this is where all of your devices that need to get the most protection would typically operate inside of. So the default configuration for the SSL VPN is to bridge to the green zone. So what that means is that when your SSL VPN clients connect to your Endian device, they will receive an IP address that's inside of your green network, your local area network. And this is typically the most desired because it's as if you're functioning as if you're in the office. And using the bridge mode does have some advantages. Obviously, there's certain situations where you can't run in bridge mode, in which case you can switch to the routed mode. But for the purposes of the demonstration, we're going to just use the default configuration because that's the easiest and the most traditional. You can also configure client settings to be what we call pushed to the client. So when a client connects using our SSL VPN client, or if they're using a third party that supports this feature, then you can push things like network routes. So if there are other networks that are not living on the Endian device, you can push network routes to your client so that they can access those other networks. DNS servers, for example, so that they can, if they need to resolve internally for internal DNS stuff, you can push that, and the domain suffix as well to go along with the DNS resolution. And so for the purposes of the demonstration, really just for the sake of time, keeping this webinar on time and with a relatively short time window, we're just going to cover the most basic. Okay, right. So how do we take an Endian device, an Endian appliance, and get the most basic SSL VPN server configuration up and running? So we're not going to talk about we're not going to cover the advanced options that are available within the SSL VPN. So like two-factor authentication, which we do support on the enterprise, Active Directory authentication, things like that. We're not going to get into that today. We really just want to kind of help everyone learn the most basic way to just get an SSL VPN server up and running, and so that your users can get connected to the network. All right, so the basic steps that we're going to follow in our the live demonstration purposes, we're going to take an Endian, in this case, a virtual appliance, and we're going to install and get that set up in using VirtualBox, just as a kind of a way to show you using a local demonstration here. Obviously, the software appliance is a bare metal installation. So if you have hardware that's laying around that meets the minimum specs, which you can find on our website, you can easily install a software appliance onto your existing hardware. And then the virtual appliance is great because if you have any kind of virtual infrastructure set up like VMware, Zen, KVM, Hyper-V, the virtual appliance that we offer works on all of those platforms. I'm going to be using VirtualBox just because I'm doing the demonstration on my local computer here, but any of those platforms are supported. And so then once the device is installed and we have the basic network configuration set up, we will walk through how to set up the SSL VPN server on the Endian, and we'll create a test user account, obviously. And then the last part, obviously, is to show the connection from using the Endian SSL VPN client to actually connect to our test Endian SSL VPN server. All right, so that's the basic steps that we're going to follow here. So we're going to go ahead and do our demonstration. All right, so I've got VirtualBox here. Let me. Hopefully everybody can see this. Don't know if there's a way to zoom in here. I'll kind of narrate as I'm going through this. Let me know if you're having any issues in terms of seeing the presentation. But so we've got VirtualBox here. We're going to create a new virtual machine to import our Endian virtual appliance. So in this case, I'm going to set up a new virtual machine. I'll just call it Endian 5.1, which is the latest release of Endian. I'll select Linux as the type, and also just select other Linux 64-bit. It is a 64-bit appliance. I'll hit continue. So now you set up the RAM. I'll just do 2 gigs of RAM for demonstration purposes. So it's asking to create a virtual disk. If you're doing a software appliance, you could do that now. You could create a hard disk, and then you would install using the ISO disk. Because we have a virtual appliance, I'm just going to import the existing virtual hard disk, the VMDK file that we have that's included with the Endian virtual appliance. So I'll just browse to that here, select the file, and we'll hit create. So you can see that it created our virtual appliance here. So I just need to go in and I'm going to adjust the settings just for the purposes of the network interfaces. So for those of you, just the basic configuration that we're going to run today is what we call the default configuration, which is where Endian is a gateway appliance, meaning that we have one interface of the Endian connected to our internet connection, and we have the other interface connected to our green zone, which is our local area network. So for that configuration, we need 2 network interfaces, obviously. So I'm just going to go to our network tab and enable a second network adapter and make sure that it's bridged to my local computer here so that it can get on my network and be accessible for me to configure. So I'll say OK to that, and then what we'll do is start up our virtual machine. Let me bring this over here. I don't think we can make it any bigger since it's the console. So the device is basically booting up now from the virtual disk, which you can see here. If you have a software appliance, what you'll see when you boot from the ISO disk is that you'll get a console-based installation wizard with a kind of a blue screen, and it'll walk you through setting up the disk and partitioning and and then it will ask you for the network configuration for your green network interface. And then once that's done, you can reboot. It will boot from the disk at that point, and you'll be kind of where we are right now, which is the device will be booting up for the first time. So we have several options here. We can configure from the GUI. We also have a console-based network configuration wizard, which walks you through the same thing that you would walk through from the GUI. So for the purposes of getting the kind of expediency, I'm just going to run through the network-based wizard. Let me see if I can make this any bigger. I don't think I can. All right, well, hopefully everybody can see. I'll just narrate as I'm walking through here. So I'm going to select option 5 from the console menu, which is for our network configuration wizard. And again, this is really for expediency. So what you also can do at this point is you can connect your computer to the green interface of the Endian device, and then you would be able to access the web network configuration wizard of the device by using this URL that you see here for the green zone. So the default IP for the green interface of the Endian is 192.168.0.15. If you open your browser, if you connect your device and set a static IP on your PC in that 0 subnet, and then open a browser, you can go to the HTTPS IP on port 10443, and you'll be greeted with the startup wizard for the Endian, and it will walk you through setting up the passwords and setting the network information to get the device online and make it accessible. I'll show you what that looks like here once we get this device configured. So I'm just going to go through the console wizard here. The default password on an Endian device is Endian, all lowercase, Endian. And it will prompt you to set a new password, obviously, for security reasons. So we'll go ahead and do that now. So now we'll walk through the steps. So we can set a host name on the device. In this case, we don't really care about host name or domain, which is what it's asking. So now it's asking to set up the red interface, which is our internet uplink. We're going to leave it as DHCP. Depending on your internet connection, you'll select DHCP or static. In this case, we're just going to use DHCP, and we're going to tell it that we want to use our second network interface, which is ETH1. We'll set the DNS information here, so we'll point it in our local network, and then we'll use a public for the second, which is just Google. Now it's asking to set up the green device, which is our local area network, our most trusted internal network. Obviously, we only have one network interface left, so that's going to be the ETH0 interface. For the purpose of this demonstration, we're just going to leave the default IP on the green device. You can choose to enable DHCP on the green interface. So traditionally, obviously your green interface would be plugged into a switch where all of your wired devices would be connected to. And you could have DHCP enabled, obviously, so that devices can automatically receive an IP address. Since we're not going to use the green network for the demonstration, we'll just leave it as off. There are other internal network zones that represent different networks. The orange network is a DMZ network. We're not going to use that for the purposes of the demonstration because we don't need it, so I'm just going to skip that. The blue network is for our hotspot feature, which again we're not using today, so we're just going to skip through that. If we want to enable secure SSH access for the command line, we'll leave that as on. And then there's an option to allow access to our device management interface, so SSH and web management interface from all of our interfaces, meaning even from the red interface. We're going to turn that as on so that I can bring up the web interface for everybody. And then we're just going to confirm that we want to save this configuration. So now the device will apply those changes that we selected through the wizard. And then at that point, when we see the red interface, we should be able to then open up our browser and connect to the web management interface of the Endian. So there you can see a DHCP and IP address in my local area network here, so 90.157. So I'm going to open our browser here and go to https 192.168.90.157 on port 10443. So Safari is going to give me a warning about a self-signed certificate. So you just have to kind of work your way through accepting that. Now you'll see so this is the web interface of our Endian demo appliance. So the first thing, since we've already gone through the network wizard, that we'll see is it'll ask us to register to Endian Network, which is it's basically our centralized remote access and licensing solution for all Endian devices. So you definitely will want to do this if you're using the enterprise Endian product. This will allow you to get things like updates and upgrades that are available for the Endian appliance, so you can get your device fully up to date. And it also allows you to get all of your security subscriptions, so web filtering, email filtering, antivirus, IPS, all of those things. In addition to also just giving you an easy way to get into your device without being on your local network. You can actually connect to the web management interface through Endian Network as well. So I'll show you what that looks like in a second. So when you get an Endian appliance, enterprise appliance, you'll receive an activation code and a download link for the image. If you've never created an account on Endian Network, if you don't have an account on Endian Network, you'll need to do that the very first time. So here it's asking us if we already have an Endian Network account. So if we did not have an Endian Network account, you can go to network.endian.com/register.php. And once you're there, it will ask for your activation code. You just paste your activation code that you received here and hit continue, and it will give you a short form where you can create your Endian Network account. So your username, password, your name, email, etc. And then once that's done, you have an Endian Network account. You can come back here and you could say yes. In this case, I do have an Endian Network account, obviously. So we're going to go ahead and just register the appliance real quick. I'm going to paste my activation key. Just going to call it. We'll provide the basic information here. Agree, and then we'll hit register. Not now. All right, so our device will give us a confirmation page here that says our Endian Network registration is complete. In this case, it's a demo license, so it's a 28 days of validity. And we can see the information here. If we click finish, we'll be taken to the web management interface of the device, and we'll log in using admin, which is the web login username, and then we'll use the password that we set up. So the first thing you'll do here is to just accept the license agreement. Once that's done, you should be able to then go to the dashboard. All right, so this is the first thing you see when you log onto your Endian device. We talked about the network configuration wizard. So if we had not used the console wizard and just chosen to use the web management wizard, it would look like this. You wouldn't see all of the menu options. It would just be a self-contained wizard that looks like this that walks you through setting up the network. So you choose the mode that you're wanting to run, and then again, so these are all kind of similar to what we did before. You can set up your green zone, set up the IP information for the red zone. In this case, it's DHCP. And so I won't go through all of this. I'll cancel out. But just to give you an idea of what that looks like, you can do either way. It's really the same thing. All right. So what we're interested in here is our SSL VPN, obviously. So you'll find that under the VPN tab. So the first thing we'll do is to enable by clicking the toggle switch. And once that's done, what you'll see is the default configuration for the OpenVPN server. So there's a lot of options here. We really don't have time to go into every single one of them. Just to let you know that there's more advanced functionality of SSL VPN. The default mode is what we call pre-shared key. So you need the client, in order to connect, will need your certificate, server certificate, and a valid username and password from an account that you created, which we'll show you here in a second. There are other advanced modes that you can run, like with X509, so more of a PKI infrastructure. You can also do X509 with pre-shared key, so more advanced security around your VPN options. So the main thing to be concerned with once the SSL VPN server is enabled, there'll be a default server instance. Remember, we talked about being able to run multiple instances. We're not going to do that here. We're just going to set up one instance of SSL of OpenVPN. This is our default configuration that's created for us. So we're going to click the pencil icon here to edit that and just kind of go over the fields here. So the main things to look at here are if you want it to bind to a specific public IP. For example, if you have multiple public IPs and you only want OpenVPN to run on a certain one, you can specify that IP address here. Otherwise, it's going to bind to all of your public interfaces, all of your interfaces. The default port is UDP 1194. So we're just going to leave that in place here, but this is where you could come to specify a custom the protocol and the port that you want OpenVPN to run on. Like we talked about, there's bridged mode and routed mode. The default is bridged. In this case, it's bridged to our green zone. If you have the other network zones configured or utilized on your Endian device, like orange and blue, you can also create have the bridge or have it be bridged to any of those internal networks as well. But the traditional is to connect to the green zone, which is what you would assume. If you don't want to run bridged mode, you want to run routed mode, you can just uncheck that, and you would provide your own VPN subnet to use for that. So one thing I will note here with the bridged mode is to be aware of is the IP pool that you want to hand out IPs. So this is from our green zone, so green subnet, the 0.x/24 subnet. What you'll want to take care is that your SSL VPN pool of IPs does not conflict with your DHCP that you're using on the Endian to hand out IPs. So those are two different things. You'll want to set aside a range of IPs which are not being used by the Endian for network DHCP that can be utilized within your OpenVPN server instance. This way you don't have IP conflicts where a user that's actually plugged into your office, that's at the office, and a user connects from SSL VPN and they get the same IP, and that's obviously going to cause problems for those devices. So you want to make sure that you set aside a static range of IPs that's not being utilized by Endian under DHCP. So that's under your services options here. You could see which IPs you're using for DHCP. In this case, we don't have it enabled, so obviously it's not something to be overly concerned with for our demo, but for most people, they're using DHCP. You want to make sure that you allocate an IP range that is not within your DHCP scope on the Endian device. So I'm just going to say that for demonstration purposes, 0.30 to 0.50, so that's 20 IPs. and it's not being utilized by Endian for DHCP, we're just going to set aside that pool for OpenVPN clients to use when they connect. Yeah, and we're not going to make any other changes here. There's a lot of advanced options here. We're not going to really go into. The defaults are okay. If you want to push DNS servers or network routes or domain suffix, all of that can be found under the advanced options tab. In this case, we're not really going to mess with any of that stuff. So we'll go ahead and hit change here, and we'll hit apply to apply our changes to the device. So at this point, the SSL VPN server is running on UDP port 1194. So what we'll need to do before we set up a user account is to download our certificate, server certificate. So if we click this, you will get a download prompt, and the certificate will be downloaded to your computer. It will be a certificate file, so like a PEM file. And we'll be using that when we set up the SSL VPN client to connect. So the last thing we need to do here that our SSL VPN server is up and running and configured is we're going to create a user account for myself so that I can connect to the SSL VPN server. So we'll use a username. I'll just use Ben in this case. And I'll set up a password. And that's really all you have to do at this point for a very basic. And as you scroll down, the only other thing that you could look at is the enabled services. So when you create a user account, you can have that user account, you can specify which VPN services you want to utilize that user account for. In our case, we're only using OpenVPN because we're not messing with IPsec or setting up IPsec. But if you were setting up IPsec like L2TP or XAuth, you can have this user account be shared for all of those VPN services. So there's one login, whether they're logging into OpenVPN or L2TP or XAuth. We'll just need it enabled since it doesn't really matter since we're not using those other services. And we'll go ahead and click add here. So we have a user account, we have our SSL VPN server created and running, we've downloaded our certificate. So now the last step is to set up our client. So you can find the SSL VPN client in Endian network. So that's another reason you want to register your appliance, is to get access to the Endian SSL VPN client. So under your downloads tab, you'll find the first page will be all of your what we call the Connect app, which is our SSL VPN, OpenVPN client for Endian. So we have Mac and Windows, and then we have some instructions on how to set up Linux since it's built into the operating system. And we have different versions for the different operating systems. So make sure you check, you use the most current one, but you use the one that's supported by your operating system. So I already have mine installed, so I'll bring it up for you here so that we can walk through that configuration. All right, gotta get all my windows out of the way here. All right, hopefully you can see that. I don't think I can make it any bigger. So this is the Connect app. This is for Mac, obviously, but it looks identical on Windows as well. So the first thing you want to do is set up a new profile, which is a profile is a server connection for SSL. You can have as many profiles as you want. So if you have a bunch of different Endian devices out there and you want to have a login to each one, you can create a profile on your client so that you can connect to each one individually if you want, if they're not networked together, for example. So we'll click edit. We already have a profile here that we've created. I'll just kind of walk you through it. So you just give it a name to reference the name of the device. There's two options here, OpenVPN and Switchboard. So Switchboard is something that's part of our Connect platform. We're not going to go into detail about that. So for our setting up an SSL VPN server, we want OpenVPN. Configuration mode is manual, meaning we want to specify the information. So the main things that we need are the the IP address of our server. So in this case, it's 192.168.90.157 is the IP on the red interface. We're going to use username and password because that's what we set it up as. So we'll browse to our certificate file. In this case, it's this cacert20.pem. And then we'll have the username and password. I'll just retype my password to make sure that's correct. And that's it basically. So we'll say okay. There are advanced options here. So if we're not using UDP 1194, which is the default, we can come in here and specify the port or the type of tunnel device as well. Since we're using the default, all of these are correct. So we're just going to leave that and we'll say okay. So then you can see that our profile, what we called Houston, is selected, and we'll go ahead and click sign in here to begin the connection process, and you'll have a progress bar that's updated down here. And then once you're connected, you'll see down at the bottom left, it will say connection established by Ben, which is my username, and it gives you the time that you've been connected to the VPN, and it shows you your VPN client IP address that you've received. So we set aside 0.30 to 0.50, so I got the first IP, which is the 0.30. And I think on the Endian device as well, you can come to under status VPN connections. You can see which users are connected to your VPN. There's my connection right there. Of course, I'm connecting from my local network, so the remote IP, which is the real IP, is this 90.27, but in most cases it's going to be some internet connected IP if they're connecting from the internet. Yeah, so that's it. Let me pull up the client again, and just to terminate our connection here, we can just hit log out, and our user's then logged out. So once you're connected using the Connect app, you'll have network access to the green zone, obviously. So any devices that you need to access there, servers, printers, whatever, can all be accessed using the real IP of those devices in the green zone. You have full access to those. So it's as if you're connected at the office, for example. So all of your internal resources should then be accessible. Yeah, so that's concludes the demonstration. So I'll just check real quick to see if we have any pending questions. So somebody asked about whether this tutorial applies to the enterprise UTM, or does it also apply to the community. So the basic steps that you saw on the server configuration are the same. The only difference is going to be that you do not have access to the Connect app client, which obviously is just depends on the level of importance of having that. You can use any OpenVPN, open source OpenVPN client that's out there to connect to the community as well. Somebody asked about the recording being available, so we will publish the recording shortly after this webinar. So anyone who wants to go back and rewatch it, or those who didn't get a chance to watch it the first time, will have access to that as well. All right, so yeah, so that concludes our webinar for today. So thank you everybody for joining us today, and I hope that if nothing else, you learned something new, even if it was something small. And yeah, hopefully everybody can use this information to their advantage to be able to provide some kind of benefit to their friends or to their colleagues during these times where everybody is working from home. So thanks for joining us again today, and we look forward to talking to all of you in the near future. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great day.